Yeah, I think the earliest mantra I kind of wrote down for myself in parenting was your motherhood is only as good as your personhood. And so I always do think that, I remember in my early 20s having real empathy for my parents for the first time because I saw them as people, and not just like, the parents that I felt were not parenty enough.
Hello, I'm Nina Westbrook, and this is the Do Tell Relationship Podcast. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a relationship expert, and a generally curious person fascinated by exploring the many ways we connect with one another. I'm here to guide you through the twists and turns of navigating your relationships with authenticity and compassion. Join me as we dive into candid conversations with health experts, celebrities, and overall interesting people, exploring their philosophies on relationships, life, wellness, and making a lasting impact. So grab your favorite beverage, cozy up, and let's explore what truly matters in life. Welcome to the Do Tell Relationship Podcast, where every episode is an invitation to deepen your connections and live your most authentic life. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Do Tell Relationship Podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Do Tell Relationship Podcast. Today's guest is Cleo Wade. She's a New York Times bestselling author and poet. Cleo has become quite popular by sharing her insights on love, resiliency, and empowerment. I can't wait to get into our conversation later, where she will be talking a lot more about her new book coming out, which is very exciting. And before we do that, let's jump into a few questions from you guys. Go ahead, Megan. What's our first question?
Great. Thank you. So our first question today is, what are some signs that it might be time to seek professional help for mental health concerns?
That's a really great question. I feel like each of our journeys and each of our experiences and the things that we're going through in our daily lives are so different. So that's going to look different for everyone. But I would say there is no wrong or right time to seek out professional help. If you feel you would like professional help, then it's a good time to seek it out. You don't have to wait. I think a common misconception is that you have to wait for everything to kind of hit the fan, right? For everything to kind of blow up and before you seek out professional help or professional services, but that's just not true. Oftentimes seeking out professional help in a preventative way, it can be really beneficial. If you think about it, in terms of like before you get married, you might have someone who says, maybe you should consider taking couples counseling. And what that does is it's not because you guys are not doing well or they don't believe in you as a couple. But typically there are some conversations that we might shy away from prior to getting married that you might be able to address and set clear expectations and manage expectations prior to getting married. That way, when you get into the marriage, certain things aren't popping up and surprising you. So that's kind of therapy in a more preventative way. And so when it comes to dealing with difficult feelings in your everyday life, and you're feeling like you're having a hard time managing those feelings, or managing the anxiety or depression or whatever it is that you're going through, and you feel like it is preventing you from being able to complete your daily task, like getting up in the morning and going to school or going to work, eating regularly, being able to go to sleep at night, and get a good night's rest. If it's impacting your ability to go to work, to care for your children, and to carry out just simple everyday tasks, then that's usually a really good indicator that it's time to seek out professional help.
That makes total sense. And I feel like sometimes people don't always do that because they don't know what it's going to be like, or they don't know how much it's going to cost. And there are resources in almost every city. I feel like that's such an important reminder. And sometimes it's our closest people that are telling us something's up, and we may not notice it ourselves, and we need to listen.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, When it comes to therapy, the main goal of therapy is to gain insight and to learn tools and tips on how to do things in your life better. There's space for all of us to grow and improve in our lives and to do better. So that means that therapy can be for anybody at any stage or any point in your life. The last thing I would say that I think is so important for me to address is this idea of, therapy not having a good experience in therapy. I feel like a lot of times we might try out a therapist, and because of one bad experience, we might write off therapy altogether, right? Where when you're looking for a therapist, or if you do decide that you want to seek out professional help, you have to keep in mind that, like any other relationship in your life, the therapeutic relationship is very important. And it's important to like your therapist, and it's important to get along and to feel heard and understood. And feel like you're on the same track. And if it doesn't work out with your first therapist, then that's okay. You're not going to hurt their feelings. I'm sure I can assure you. We've been trained as therapists not to be hurt by being passed over. But always try again. Keep looking for that person you connect with the same way as you might look for a partner or a friendship in everyday life, and find someone that really fits with you and that you feel really good about doing the work with.
I love that. That's such a great reminder. When you're looking for someone to talk to, that's a sign right there. And you don't feel like you have someone nearby that you can talk to. That's what they're there for. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, so I think we're going to have Cleo coming in soon, and we will continue this conversation, and we'll be right back. Your books, poetry, and ability to write with so much love, compassion, and intention is just really remarkable. I feel like I don't know many poets.
There are more and more and more.
I know. But it's really, but what you've been able to do and the way you're able to make people feel so warm. I was saying, like, as soon as you walked in, you gave me the warmest, biggest hug and I really, really needed that today. I really did, more than you know. What's it like for you being a poet and being someone that people really look to be uplifted? And that's what we're getting from your work, you know?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your pod, by the way, because I'm such a fan. And the idea of writing a poem is probably the last part of my process as far as thinking about a poem as in that type of writing style or poetry in that way. I kind of approach my work more as, because this is what kind of led me into it, is really being a friend, or listening or feeling or hearing what my friends were going through, or I am kind of that annoying person that's going to talk to you on the subway, or like, you're in line at the grocery store and I'm kind of like, oh, were those on sale? And then I'm all of a sudden hearing about your grandma. And so I really, I find so much gratitude and purpose in those types of macro and micro connections in community. Mm-hmm. And so for me, why I have always personally loved poetry was because it felt like the writing format with not as many rules. Mm-hmm. And I always say that to anyone who doesn't like or says they don't like poetry. It's just that you haven't read the poem that makes you like poetry yet. Because to me, I could say that the first poem I ever loved was probably a Lauryn Hill song, was probably the entire album of Miseducation. Every song is probably X Factor. X Factor was one of the songs where the lyrics made me feel that I could get through heartbreak. And so I knew the power of words in that way. And I am not blessed with musical ability, sadly, for me. Or else I would have been like ripping and running, singing my song. But I don't have a song. But I did. I felt like I did feel that I was the call that most of my girlfriends would make when something was happening. And so I did start to feel like, oh, I feel like I have the words for these moments of my girlfriends' lives. And I wonder how universal they are, which is how I started sharing them, whether it was on the side of a building or on Instagram or in my books, because I felt like, wow, this is really helping me and this is really helping them. I don't think that our lived experiences are without universal connection to everyone, no matter where you're from. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I started to share them. And I think the editing process of what makes them, of when the kind of poetry part comes in, is the real chipping away I do at making them universal. So, you have if you called me about something, everything I would say would have to do with every character in your life and knowing you, and everything would be really specific to you. Mm-hmm. And then in my own reflections, I would say, okay, but what is the thread in there that reveals the truth she already knew within? Because most good friends are listening, holding the space, and then reflecting a truth you already have inside of yourself. Mm-hmm. And so where I try to make things, I guess, into a poem or in prose is, all right, well, where was that truth? And that truth is usually what's universal when you've dropped all the drama of the characters and the people of life and the I can't believe she called me with this, or da-da-da-da-da-da. There is this kind of, well, ultimately, this is pushing up against your boundaries, and I think we can all agree boundaries are important.
Right.
And I think that's where I then try to make it into something that becomes a poem, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And your story sounds so similar to mine. And it's so interesting how different, the different paths we chose or took. But what you're saying sounds very familiar to me. Yeah. And I think as a poet or someone who writes, you are impacting people with your words, and you do understand the importance and the significance of words and how they can change lives. And so as a therapist, all of those same themes and those same ideas ring true. I think that's really beautiful. And I feel like your knack for finding commonalities and plays probably a huge role in your ability to connect and create community. And also just be able to reach and impact so many different people. Because like you said, anytime you're building a relationship with someone or connecting with someone, you want to kind of meet them where they're at and find that little commonality. So you've been able to do that through your poetry, is figure out the way to say something to connect to as many people as you possibly can.
Well, I also, when I think about how similarly you and I approach what we do, is that there is this, so many people who struggle to find, build, or hold community. It's because there's not intention towards community. To have community is a really intentional existence. Mm-hmm. You really work on generosity. You really work on gratitude. You really work on ego. There's a lot you have to kind of shift, strip, hold. You really rethink what society tells you is your share versus theirs, your space. And so in that, there's a minute to minuteness of being intentional. Like, you really have to think about how thoughtful you have to be of people's triggers, sensitivities, love languages, so many things like that. And so if you decide that, you have this part of you that you want to allow to be of service to others. Mm-hmm. The next step is to say, okay, well, what does it take to be in the community I want to serve?
Right.
And then in that, there's so much self-reflection you have to have on well, what do I need to learn and unlearn in order to approach this with the intentionality that makes it possible?
With all of that said, you were not born who you are today, right?
You're like, right?
I'm sure there have been many experiences and many lessons and different things that you've learned along your journey? Because I know you lived in New York. You're working in New York.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I'm going to travel the world. And somehow you ended up here in LA. Growing up, did you feel like you always knew you wanted to be a writer, a poet, an artist? Or is that something you kind of learned along the way?
Well, I feel lucky to have grown up in New Orleans because New Orleans is New Orleans has a pace that really encourages connection and appreciation of the arts. So you're walking really slowly. It's hot. You're not rushing. There's music everywhere. You walk down the streets and you smell food. So it's a place that really asks you to connect with your kind of five senses. And it's a place that really encourages being with others in order to have joy. So, your school stops. I took a picture of this in January when I was there, February, because it was like, instead of saying like spring break on the school kind of sign, where they put like the football games and things, it was like, okay, Mardi Gras break is these days, you're literally out of school. They cancel school
so
that you can go be in the streets to watch these floats that people hand paint all year round. While every marching band is in every parade, so that you can, because they are telling you as a culture, we value music and dancing in the streets as much as we value education, a traditional education in a school. That's pretty unique. And so I think that it felt possible, although I don't know that I would have imagined what type of art form I would have done. Even having illustrated this book myself, I'm in shock because I never got an A in art class in my life. Maybe I got a C. I don't even know. I don't think I was the person who felt impressive in the arts. I don't even think I felt impressive in writing or anything like that, but I was interested. And I went to an art summer camp when I was younger, and there was a poetry class at the end of the day. And I took it, and I remember thinking, wow, this is so cool. And it definitely struck me. But I didn't see modern poets. I knew Maya Angelou, but even by that time, Maya Angelou was, making films, and I never, if someone in my house was watching a morning show, I didn't see a poet on it. And I didn't have a particularly intellectual family. So I wasn't like, oh, I fell into poetry because in the evenings, my father would read me Rumi. No. He would be... First of all, in the evenings, my parents were like out dancing somewhere. But if they were home, they'd have Nina Simone or Aretha Franklin or all these incredible musicians and music kind of flowing through our house. And my dad is a photographer, so he'd sell photos out of our living room. Basically, that's how he made a living. And my mom made salads, and she'd sell them. She'd make them on the kitchen counter and sell them door to door. And so I saw early on that there were these ways in which you could self-start, your kind of personal passion or what you felt your gift was, and then bring it to the world however, and in whatever way worked for you.
Wow.
So I didn't have, neither of my parents want to work hard. And I don't even mean that that almost seems like an insult into our world today.
No, I totally understand what you're saying, because we value that hustle and bustle.
Yeah, we're like a hustle and grind era of culture. And I would say that New Orleans kind of, for the most part, exists in this almost European, like the reason we like to or hope to go to Europe one day or be in Italy over the summer or whatever, because it seems that the whole town is at lunch. And New Orleans is really like that. And so, there was never, there's even like a page in this, my new book that says, may you stay, because the whole book is kind of wishes for your life. And there's a page that says, may you stay up too late because the music was too good to go home early. Or do you know, or may there be nights you stay up too late? Because while I have found a different type of harmony in my life than my parents because of, perhaps the scale of the dreams I hope to achieve, I always have in mind that they're on the very kind of far right spectrum of this, but their entire work was just so that they could go out dancing. They always made just enough to support their dreams for themselves had to do with where they were in community and the songs they were listening to and the places they were dancing or the food they were eating. And so even in how I raised my own kids, or even, raise myself as a parent, right? Where I'm always giving myself a talking to of okay, what's enough and what's not. And, there are moments where I'm like, okay, you know what? I can have the babysitter be with the kids in the morning because I am having fun, and knowing I get to have this joy as an adult, staying out too late dancing is a part of what makes me a great parent. Right. Because I have no resentment around the time I spend with my kids because I give this to myself.
I really like that. I feel like a lot of times I think as parents and especially as moms, we struggle. In my house, the dad guilt is major because my husband travels a lot for work. So I love that you think about those things intentionally, but understand that you have to do things for you, do things that make you happy and fulfilled as a complete and whole human, rather than just nurturing one part of yourself. That's so important.
Yeah, I think the earliest mantra I kind of wrote down for myself in parenting was your motherhood is only as good as your personhood. And so I always do think that, I remember in my early 20s, having real empathy for my parents for the first time because I saw them as people, and not just the parents that I felt were not parenty enough. And I wondered, what if I could give myself that empathy really early on, to always approach myself as this person, and even allow my kids to see me as a person, and not a hero, or not as a perfect mom, or not as this kind of one role. It's really funny. My best friend, Diara, she stays with us a lot, and my kids call her Auntie Dee, and her favorite thing to say to my kids, because, it's always great to have that one kind of auntie that comes in, he says the thing that you're not going to say to them. And so if they're like, mommy, 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 because, that's their favorite word. And she's like, girls, your mommy is a human being. She is a person. Y'all aren't going to be driving my best friend crazy today. And I'm always just like,
finally, someone told them.
Yes, I was sitting there and I was like, because they wouldn't have been able to hear that from me. And it's true. They can't, they couldn't, and they wouldn't. And
what was the response and the reaction like?
First of all, she says it to them every morning because it's during mealtime where kids get the most psycho.
Okay.
People think it's like bedtime, but I swear it's mealtime. Bedtime can go smoothly if you wear them out all day. So as soon as the weather's nice in LA, which, the big thing about LA is they say the weather's so great.
Rain,
I think
gloom.
Last
weekend was like the last rain though, right? That's
Prayer,
what they say.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So the second it's even, if it's above 70, I always am like, kids, you're outside. Because I have to be like that. And, all of that kind of, it's like the fresh air and the sun and all of the elements, putting them in the elements is great for them and tires them out.
Absolutely. If they can swim, give us that good LA weather, right? Yep. Let them swim all day and they'll be ready for bed. It'll be great.
If I'm really desperate, I'll heat up the hot pool and be like, all right, kids, just get in. And they have their little floaties on and they're just I'm like, well, this is one way to do it.
That's great. I feel like a lot of us, I want to go back to something really important that you said about seeing your parents, as people. And for so many of us, we really struggle and we often put our parents on some type of pedestal. And we leave ourselves open to so much disappointment and to be hurt and to feel like because, our expectations that we have for our parents before we understand that they are human, that they are doing the best that they know how, it's so high. So coming to that realization and that understanding, is that something that happens overnight, or is it like a practice that takes time?
Well, like anything, any realization of someone's personhood often is kind of like this, giving you a new space for boundaries and order to kind of even give everyone the right space to interpret and reinterpret each other, right? So I think what has been the most interesting aha for me is because the second you have this revelation of what or who someone is, then you have to be like, okay, so what is the best and kind of healthiest way for us to have a dynamic? And so I think the biggest aha for me is that, in your early adulthood, like when adulthood's very new to you, that's when you're like, oh my God, my parents are people. And then as you get a little bit older, it's actually you're trying to get your parents to see you as a person. And I think that was also the thing I wasn't expecting to have to see my parents as people when I was, a little younger. But today I'm kind of like, okay, but I'm a person too. And then what does that mean for us? Because I can't just be what you view me as, or whether that's your daughter or whatever you've decided the boundaries or dynamic should be, because your view is that I am your daughter because I'm a person.
And who the work is on, it shifts.
Yeah.
It's much easier when the work is on you to see your parents as whole people, because you can control that, right? But what if you can't control what happens when you can't control whether or not your parents can then see you as a person?
Well, and then the struggle is that, and not all the time, but as Whitney would say, sometimes, the generation, there's such a generational difference between you and your parents, where something I notice a lot about my parents are that they do not live in reflective community. They live in a ton of community, but their community is about finding things in common, enjoying certain things, and what goes on with other people, right? So, my mom's going to sit and gossip in the kitchen all day and then watch The View, where a bunch of other people gossip about other people. And everything's just kind of like outward energy, right? There's not my dad is going to watch CNN all day and then talk with the neighbors about what the other neighbor did and and so again, it's just not reflective. So it's not really about interrogating the self. It's not really about investigating your own kind of soul actions. There's not that kind of, and by the way, none of these are better than the other.
Right.
But it's just, that is a difference generationally for us, because culturally we are more reflective because of not just therapy, but even the culture of therapy being important, or, and by the way, even in their generation, women had consciousness raising circles and things like that, where you'd create these spaces to be reflective around womanhood and race and all these other things. But that was kind of a niche space.
Right.
Whereas now I feel that there is a kind of more sweeping, with Instagram democratizing a lot of therapy tools. There is more of like prompts for reflection. Like, you do see people doing the artist way. You do see people doing 5-minute gratitude journals. You do see like this kind of, those books sell millions of copies. Like they're not, they're not tiny. They're not niche. They're not, so I think in that, it's hard sometimes to be in kind of, whether you're in conflict, disagreement, or having completely different perspectives on a situation with my parents, because I'm like, well, if we have a conflict, I go into a reflective space, and therefore I end up almost like there's an inequity in the almost emotional work we're all doing, and so that is hard. And then you're like, okay, but where do we go from here? Because as you know, you can't change people. They can change, and they can do things probably a little differently. And your elders or your parents are more likely to kind of make a tweak than a huge shift. And sometimes that's enough if you kind of approach them with acceptance and a shift in boundary.
So what you're talking about is really important. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we're kind of sandwiched between two generations that are going to be, or that are extremely polar opposites, right? Our kids being in the polar opposite generation than our parents. And we're kind of in the middle. And a lot of change and shifts have happened with us being in the middle. And so how do we, and you have become my therapist right now, because I'm really connecting all of the dots in what you're talking about. How do we take from past generations, learn from that, and decipher through it to our younger generation, our children, and things are changing so quickly, so often?
I think that there's something in holding the space for there to be kind of harmony where there may be overcorrection, right? So I think with, the perhaps a generation now where like every single person's a narcissist and everyone's a gaslighter and everyone, and I mean, as I don't have to tell you,
and everyone's too sensitive.
Yes. And I think it's but it's actually because there's a lot of people engaged in therapy speak without being engaged in therapy of any sort. And whether that's a support group, whether that, and because in therapy, especially if you're in groups, because therapy, obviously there is a financial barrier to entry to therapy, but there's all kinds of ways where you can be in therapeutic space. There isn't the kind of patience for the other's experience. There isn't the kind of deep listening, reflection. When you're and release of control of the space and situation. Some of the most patient and wise people you'll meet are those who are in the AA community, because it is a circle of sharing, questioning, and
being
patience.
Respectful also of other people's difference in opinions,
and hearing it out, and listening and asking questions. And so it's, whereas, if you think that you're just learning terms on your phone and then deciding to synthesize them however you would like, there is something in that where, the mirror part is missing. So the reflection's missing. The community engagement part is, when that's not there, there's something I think that ends up happening, and it happens to all of us, where, there's a little bit of like a God complex that comes in, because if you are only learning something and bouncing it off of yourself, that is a really self-centering kind of spiral that is okay. And there's a time and a place to just dive into the self. And priests live amongst priests and live in community. Monks live amongst monks. Like our deepest reflective people go into, or wise people, they do live in isolation or in this often, or in these humble places, but they have some type of community with each other. You're going to go to an ashram and they're all going to be, there's a togetherness, because there is, to truly find understanding and wisdom around what we go through, the community piece is pretty important. And so when you take that out, and then you're on your phone all day controlling every little thing, right? Like this, I was talking to this psychologist the other day who was like, we're just, so much of loneliness is that we are by ourselves ordering everything, including people. Because she was like, we are truly looking on a dating app as if it's Postmates now, and they're actually trying to make them all kind of look and feel the same. And, trying to tweak, change, find this thing.
And people aren't even people aren't even able to we're not putting out our authentic selves. We're not even able to be who we want to be. So we're swiping through a bunch of people who are putting a lot of content, a lot of information out that they think you want to hear because the algorithm and...
Well, it's not even you, it's your avatar. So it's actually your like sim or whatever it is. So it's, and Instagram in a lot of ways has become people's avatars doing things. It's not necessarily a place of authentic communicating in the ways that I think it probably originated. And that's not to kind of bring in the like the good old days. I mean, I don't have any skin in the game of how that is, but I do think about all the ways in which there's available instant connection, and then loneliness is skyrocketing.
Right.
So there's something, when we are, a care for or like a hope for capitalism is not necessarily like a hope for humanity, right?
Right.
So if we can kind of get ourselves out of the what we think that space should be based on what we want out of it, and more into like, well, I am wondering are we approaching leaving the world a better place in the best possible way online, right? Like, do we need to be figuring out ways to take our communities in person, where something I used to always say is that like, I think Instagram or a dating app or whatever it is the most amazing place to start a conversation. But if you want to build connection, you got to get in person, or you got to get on the phone, or you got to get together. And that's just the difference between communicating with somebody and connecting with them. I don't think it's necessarily the place that's the easiest to really connect. Yet here we are.
No, I feel like you're absolutely right. I mean, I grew up in a generation and during a time where being together was really important.
Yeah.
And whether that's family gatherings or community events or whatever the case may be, like being face to face in person was so important.
Yeah.
Even when I was in school, I think back at how long ago I went to school, and I'm like, whoa, I'm getting up there in age, but therapy was not, like telehealth was not a thing. That was like frowned upon. We were convinced that we should not be doing telehealth because it just totally diminishes the therapeutic process. But now telehealth is the preferred method of therapy and talk therapy, which is really interesting.
Well, and I think that's also observing where people are and then delivering something to them where they are. So hopefully they can, because, to me, and it, therapy is not about just
laying on a couch.
Yeah. Or giving you what you need to stay where you are. It's growth support ultimately, right?
The goal is to help introduce the tools needed to grow and to learn and to change and shift perspectives on your own, therefore not needing therapy any longer. Right.
And so to me, I'm like, it makes sense to just say, okay, where is everyone? Everyone is here not wanting to leave the house. All right, let's do telehealth therapy. Like, let's do it. Like, if that's where you are and that's where we are, like, let's serve people in where they are. And my hope is that in that we are seeing that we're trying to get people moving, because it is this kind of, stuckness, not stillness, that is keeping us from, I think, sustaining joy that is found in community. But I think it's okay to deliver to where people are. I mean, I remember when I was writing my first book, Heart Talk, and as I was designing it, and half of the book is I wrote by hand, and I remember thinking, and this is almost 10 years ago, but I was like, people feel that they don't read. Like, that is a thing I'm hearing all the time. Like, people are like, I don't read books. I don't have time to read. I remember being at a dinner and I said to the table, how many of you, if you're reading a book, you count how many pages you have till the chapter ends, and then you read it. And like every single person raised their hand. And then I said, how many people, if they see something that their friend likes, that they think their friend would like, takes a photo of the page and sends it to them in the moment. And so I realized already, and every single person raised their hand. And so I realized that we were already reading in this really disrupted way. And so when I wrote Heart Talk, I was like, okay, I want to have a book where you could read one page at a time. You could read it all the way through. You could pick it up at a random page and it wouldn't really matter. Because to me, the importance is giving people the message that I feel that they really needed in that moment. I knew I needed it. I knew my girlfriends needed it. And so I was like, what is the format to deliver this?
Wow. And
so I didn't make any chapters. There's no chapters in any of my books. Remember Love has like parts, but there's no chapters. Because I saw that people are having anxiety about page count. And so I was like, I want this to be an anxiety, chaos-free experience.
Wow.
And even so when people were saying, oh, I don't read. And I was like, well, you are on Instagram a lot.
We do.
Instagram is a reading space. It's just that you think you're just reading a different language. So you're actually like, and I know it from reading Toni Morrison, right? If you're reading other books and other authors, if you pick up a Toni Morrison book, the first 40 pages are really hard because she is speaking English, but she speaks her own language. And it is almost like a completely different, like it's dense in a different way. The wording is so specific to her, and it's so different than anything else you could read in English that you have to kind of become fluent in her language, drop in, and then, but I swear that the first 40 pages takes you as long as the next 150. Like that is just what it's like to read her books. So for me anyway. And so what I felt with, I was like, you guys just don't want to, it's becoming harder to switch languages from reading what is traditionally seen in a book and Instagram, but you are reading on it because you're reading comments and you're reading captions and you're reading text in the square box. So you're actually reading all day long. We're probably reading more than we've ever read. We're just reading short form in a really specific template.
Wow.
So when I made Heart Talk, I wanted to make it as easy to transition from that template online to the template in the book. So while it isn't like, a square box that looks like that looks exactly like the, interface of Instagram, there's a lot of white space around the text that's in my writing. There's a lot of space between that and the kind of prose that go along with that writing. And it feels like a really easy switch.
The intentionality behind creating the experience that you felt and researched would best resonate with as many people who are reading your book as possible is the reason why what the work that you're doing is so impactful and is so important. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we get back, we're going to talk more about your new book, May You Love and Be Loved. I don't know where I'm looking. And we'll be right back. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow us on social media at Do Tell Podcast for more behind the scenes footage and clips. Visit us on benebynina.com for exclusive e-workshops, wellness guides, fitness and nutrition resources, and my Do Tell conversation card game, all created to encourage a lifetime of growth, inspiration, and personal development. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, where you will find all of my past episodes and interviews with other incredible guests. Tell us a little bit about your book and the first book that you've illustrated.
So this is so basically when I was, Bayou was born. It was something that was really unique to my experience with Bayou that I didn't have with Memphis. So with Memphis, my first daughter, I had no milk, but I still try to get up and breastfeed every night. And with Bayou, Bayou had like a slight tongue tie, but it was so slight that the doctor was like, if she were my kid, I wouldn't do anything. So I was like, well, then I'm not gonna cut it. So I was like, I'm not gonna do anything. But it did hurt. Like, it made the feeding a little painful because she was just doing something weird. So I'd established her milk on a pump, which then I was like balling out of control with milk. I had so much milk. It was unbelievable. I was like, wow, like. Because then I realized, I was like, wow, if I would have probably established on the pump, I probably, like, they would have thought I think they thought I had twins, the they being my boobs. So, what was different was, when I'd get up to feed in the middle of the night for Memphis, I'd be holding her, so I didn't have free hands. But for Bayou, I'd get up in the middle of the night and pump. And so I kept a little Post-it note and pen next to me. So I started writing this poem called May You Love and Be Loved. And it was really just meant to be wishes for their life. I was thinking of maybe painting a mural in their room or something like that. And so I started writing it, and I really didn't want to write another book. And if I was probably going to think more about writing my next adult book. But I was still kind of like, I had written 3 books right before Bayou was born. So I'd have my first kid's book come out, and the Heart Talk Journal and Where to Begin had all come out from the time I'd gotten pregnant with Memphis to Bayou. So I was kind of burnt out, and so I just started writing it, and I kept it for, I don't know, a year and a half or so. And I'd kind of add to it, and then I all of a sudden had this kind of box of these Post-its of wishes for your life. It's like the first one being, may you love and be loved. And may you wonder and wander. May you delight in things big and small. May you try new things, especially food. And so I just started thinking about not only what I wanted for their life, but what I kind of wanted for my own life to if I was just so busy being a writer or a mom or all of these things outside of my own identity of living my own life, what would be these kind of anchors to bring me back to the things that are important for my own selfhood?
Right.
And so as I started finishing it, I sent it to my kids' book editor, and I was like, I think I have a book. I was like, I know that I said, because when I wrote my first kids' book, I didn't have this idea that I wanted to be a children's book author, because a lot of people do like to do that. You notice a lot of like actors or something will be like, I write kids' books, but it's almost like I think sometimes people think that it's like just an easier book to write or something like that. So for me, I was like, I never wanted to write something just to say like, oh, I have a book like that, because it is such I take it so seriously. And so I remember with that book, I was like, no, I don't see myself as a children's book writer. I just had that one book in my heart. And that was before I even had kids that I wrote that kids book. I was pregnant with Memphis when I was finishing it. And then I had just had her when it came out. But I'd had this idea. I'd had this mantra in my head that was, I said to the road, where do you lead? The road said, be a leader and find out. And when I was writing Heart Talk, I had another Post-it and I put it on my board. And I was like, I don't want this to be in Heart Talk. It doesn't make sense, but I want to write about this. Like, I want to write about a conversation with the road. And that was my first kids book. And so for this one, I sent it to her and I was like, I know I said I probably don't have another children's book in me, but I started writing this book of wishes for my daughter's lives, and I really wish this for everyone's life. Do you think we could make this into a book? And I kind of hoped that she would say no, because, I don't write traditional poetry. I mean, What the Road Said did really well, thank you, Jesus. But I thought it was kind of like a fluke almost. I was like, oh, like, who wants poetry books for kids? Like, and, because my kids are reading Pete the Cat's Pizza Party. Like, they just are. So I didn't know that she'd say yes, and then she did. And then we started looking for illustrators, and I'd always painted, but I only painted my words. So if you look at the title, you can see this kind of blue eye watercolor, things like that all the time, and then I outline them in my kind of black lines. And so I'd always drawn things like that. And I think because my editor had seen that, after we couldn't find an illustrator, I looked through so many, and I was starting to, I know, drive her crazy, because she's not afraid to tell you that you're driving her crazy. And so she's like, why don't you just, she actually said it to Kate. She's like, I think my agent, she was like, I think Cleo should draw this book. And Kate called me and was like, Jean wants you to draw the book.
Wow.
And I was like, I can't draw the book. I have no idea how to draw. I never got it. I'm not an A student. I don't even know what grades I got in art class, but they were not good. Like I don't remember ever even like being in the art class. I think I like blacked out the whole thing. I'm not an artist in that way. I have no idea how to draw objects or tell a story through drawings. Like I mean, that just seems really hard. And she's like, well, that's what Jean wants. So if you want to tell her no, you have to tell her you have to tell her. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. And so I said yes, but then I didn't even try for probably 6 months. And I just kept telling Jean I can't do it. Aww. I was like, I just don't think I can do this. Like, because every time I thought I could sit down to try, nothing would happen. And she was like, have you really tried? She's like, you have not sent me a page. So like, we don't know if you can't really do it yet. But I had done that old school traditional thing of like, not even actually trying. Like,
wow.
I didn't have the thing where I'd sat down and been like, this doesn't make sense. So I could look at it. Like I had given up before I tried. And so I remember maybe 2 summers ago, I was in Italy at a friend's, staying next door to a friend's house. And she was coming the next weekend and it was about to be her 50th birthday. And I wanted to kind of leave her a special present, but it's kind of like one of those people where you're like, oh, I feel like she has everything. And so there was a little store in the hotel that sold watercolors and little tiny sheets of paper. Wow. And so I decided to just draw 50 objects for her birthday and leave this kind of stack of 50 little cards on her thing. And they were really simple. It was, an apple, and then it was a fig, it was an olive. It was, and after I'd done that, I was like, maybe I could, like, it's almost like I needed the no pressure but total labor of love to even maybe wrap my head around it. And I was like, I think I'm figuring out that I do have a style in which I could draw something, because this is how I would draw something that I felt was really me and meaningful for someone I love. And so I'd actually taken a photo of all of those that I'd drawn for her. And then when I got home from that trip, I also was like, you never know what you can do until you give yourself real time to try. And being a mom, as you know, you're kind of like, you try to do everything in half the time, but your mom brain really needs twice the time. And that is like the ultimate conflict that we have every day, is that I'm like, my brain needs at least 25% more time than it needed before I had kids. And I want to give everything 35% less time at minimum, if not 50% less time. And so I just did it. And so I sat down for, 10, I did like some 10-hour days, and I just started with a list of things I felt were beautiful or whimsical or interesting. So, there's a page in the book that says, may your home always be more than a place. And so I was like, God, I could see like a bird's nest and like 2 birds flying away from the nest. And so I still worked like I did for my friends. I actually decided to draw everything on small sheets of paper and then place them together later, almost kind of like cutting them out and like putting them in these vignettes.
Wow.
And so I just sat down and did it. But for writer's block, when the words aren't coming, it's usually a sign to listen instead of speak is really. So I think, to me, I've gone through writer's block, I guess, but I feel like I've always alchemized it into a listening period or a reading period or a period of absorption, rather than feeling like something's wrong with life that day.
At UCLA, I studied English. That was my major. I got into it thinking it was something different than what it was. It was more about what you do rather than, I don't know what I thought I was getting myself into. So I am familiar, but I don't write. I do enjoy writing. I do think that I'm a pretty decent writer. But
you have really original ideas. And I think that's probably what makes writing flow for you. you have a really original take on most things. And I feel like that is what I feel manifests across all of your platforms and all of the ways in which you gift your information to people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I try to jot things down when I think of them. Just for everyone listening, what page, which illustration was the first one that you like got down and finalized and were ready to move forward with? Can you tell us?
Well, I think the first page where I was like, I had two moments of being like, have you ever done something and it just wasn't something you ever even dreamed for yourself, so it makes it really hard to even believe you did it. So you have moments of confirmation where you're like, maybe it's like you're like, yeah, I do host a podcast, or I do, or
That
like maybe
happens to me
something
all the
happens and you're like, oh wow, I now I'm used to writing books, so 7 books, 6 books, whatever later. So, but being an illustrator, I was the two moments I had where I was like, wow, I think when I really figured out how to draw these flowers, because that page was really special to me. And also when I nailed that bird's nest, because it was really difficult. And I drafted it a million times, or I think that when I'd really gotten down that like, wow, my approach was wrong. Because in my first ones, the drawings were kind of like abstract and the watercolor was all over the page. And I was like, this isn't feeling like my work. And I was like, oh, because my work has a really, really, really tight and close relationship with blank page. So like these drawings, you cannot open this book and be like, woo, like, it can't feel like a lot.
Right.
I'm not drawn to that. I don't like that. My adult books always have an incredible amount of blank and white page and white space in it to just make those black letters important and
pop,
easeful, and more than anything, easeful. Like I wanted to pop, but I also wanted to feel like, ooh, like a warm hug, like not your most kind of, eccentric, high energy experience.
You wanted the aesthetic and the look to essentially be the feeling, evoke the feeling that you want them to have reading the words on the page.
And so I think when I got the flowers down, this like one page down, I was like, wow, like I think I'm getting how to do this. And then when I got the first copy of this, and my daughters, like my 2.5 and my 4-year-old, they knew what was on each page. I was like, hey, do you know what that is? Because I kept being like, are people going to get this? And can they tell could you tell that these are 2 rain boots in a puddle? Because I was like, it felt like a stretch to me, do you know?
And so you were using them as their second opinion.
I went to read it to them, and that was obviously really emotional to be able to read this book to them. And I drew little photos of them in the book. But I'd in this kind of, there's a collage of all these faces on one page that says, "May you be someone you love." But there were certain things that I was like, "What's that?" And they were like, "A mirror," and I was like, "It is a mirror." Like I was really. I was like, wow, I did that.
That is so funny.
My 2.5-year-old can tell. Like, I didn't lead them. And she's like, that's rain boots. And I was like, it is. Yes, it is, Bayou. Like, and that's when I was like, I crushed it. And now I feel like I have all the confidence in the world. Like,
okay,
it wasn't
good.
until that.
But you passed the test.
Yes.
I'm so happy.
It wasn't until that moment when Bayou knew what every drawing was. I like, because she's just so small. I was like, you know what? I'm ready to bring this into the world. I did that.
I love that so much for you because, kids, they're so brutally honest. That could have went really bad.
Yes.
My kids they tell the truth. And
the truth is...
It
doesn't feel nice.
You in the face.
It doesn't feel nice. It doesn't.
Okay, so before we leave, which it's actually been so lovely catching up with you. I'm happy that even though we had to get together for...
On the other side of town and we live in the same neighborhood.
And and to do my podcast... I can't wait for our next gathering whenever we can get together.
We're going to do it soon. We're going to set a date after this.
Okay. Pinky promises.
Yes.
For everyone listening, you can get your copy of May You Love and Be Loved anywhere
Anywhere you buy books.
On May 7th. It's available, and it's available for I already pre-ordered mine, so it's available for pre-order whenever, but it'll be available May 7th. I like to end each podcast episode asking a question from Do Tell Card Game, which I brought you the regular version and the couples edition. What does living a happy life mean to you?
To me, a happy life is one where I can be in our natural elements in community. So cold water on my face, sunshine on my body, fresh air, people I love. And I don't really even mean that in like a hippie way, do you know? But I just mean that any time where I feel like I can be reminded and affirmed that I am probably more like a tree that's growing or a flower that's growing or a river that's kind of running, and I'm less like my Wi-Fi and my computer or like whatever robot's in my hand. I just find so much kind of peace in that and hope in that. In today's world, to ever even get a second of either of those feelings is so incredible. And then when I'm in community and can feel and be in reflected love, I am so affirmed that life is this thing worth living. So in that, there's so beyond happiness, there's so much joy. So
I love that. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
pleasure.
coming.
And thank you all.
Okay, great.
I'm so
that
happy.
was so I cannot wait to read this.